Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Pause with Nandini on NRI Affairs. Today I'm joining from Mianjin, which is the unceded lands of the Yagera and Turrbal people. We have an episode today where we are discussing what many are referring to as a rebirth of a nation, Bangladesh. To discuss this extraordinary moment in time, we have two panelists today. Dr. Farhana Sultana, who is from Dhaka University, the epicenter of the student protests. She's currently a professor in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs in Syracuse University. Dr. Farhana has been a vocal supporter of the student movement and of the interim government and has spoken about the opportunities and challenges ahead. She has also spoken out about the misinformation and Islamophobia rampant in the Indian media that we have seen, and we shall certainly talk about that today as well. I also have Shuddhabrata Sengupta, who is a respected social and political commentator from India. He's also the co-founder of the Rux Media Collective. I've always admired his astute understanding of complex issues, balanced viewpoint, and of course, his interest in democracy and social justice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great, let's just dive right in, Professor Farhana. Would it be a fair comment to call this a rebirth in the context of Bangladesh? And what does this mean to you?
Well, thank you so much, Nandini, for inviting me to this panel. And thank you to everyone else who's joining or listening in. So, what has happened in Bangladesh can be called a rebirth, or sometimes we've called it the second independence. Some people call it the Gen Z revolution for Bangladesh 2.0. So what we saw is that after nearly 16 years of a kind of autocratic dictatorship rule in Bangladesh, where there was a huge curtailing of freedom of speech, freedom of press, quite rampant corruption, cronyism, political abuse, disappearances of people who spoke out, the students were quite courageous in organizing, and they showed great self-governing skills. They came together in a solidarity to basically stand up and say no. They were brutally attacked. Many were killed, nearly 1,000, 33,000 were injured. All of this happened in the space of 3 weeks in July and the beginning of August. So July is now called Bloody July. What we saw is that despite the rolling out of like curfew and internet blackouts, the whole country being held hostage by the fact that the government was not willing to meet the terms with the students or respect the democratic process that they were demanding amongst wider issues. It had an effect to galvanize people during this time of crisis because everyone agreed with the students ultimately. So behind the students, you had their parents, their teachers, you had journalists, artists, other musicians, people from the private sector, civil society. So by the time it was early August, it was pretty evident that this was this kind of multi-ethnic, multi-religion solidarity group that demanded the ouster of the dictator and her regime, because by that time they had indiscriminately killed so many people from helicopters, from rolling cannons in the street, from highly militarized police. So yes, I think in many ways we can call this as a type of rebirth because the students are given hope to people. But at the same time, the issue right now is how to govern in a space where there is disruptive politics, 16 years of Awami League loyalists who would like to come back to power. You have the other opposition parties who were kept out and brutalized and imprisoned. They would like to contest and come back. So, but right now, the majority of the people in the country are happy to have none of the old party politics, rather be led by a group of much more neutral and competent people. But those people are not from the politics side. They're not politicians. So that's the other challenge right now. And then these catastrophic floods hit Bangladesh, right? So the new government was put in, it was inaugurated on August 8th, and the floods hit on August 20th. So now we're dealing with all of that. So it's been a bit of a crisis in Bangladesh all of July and August.
Thank you so much for that recap. I think that really clarifies some of the things that have, the forces that have come together to make this situation right now quite momentous. Shuddhabrata, what comment would you have? I know you follow Bangladesh politics and social developments quite closely. However, as we've discussed, that in the Indian media, there wasn't that much conversation on what was happening in Bangladesh, but could you recap how it was viewed, not just by the media, but also by civil society?
Thank you, Nandini, and it was wonderful to hear Dr. Sultana give us this very magisterial recapitulation of these turbulent few months. My interest in Bangladesh and stems from various reasons. I mean, my day job is I am an artist, and I'm very closely in touch with a lot of people in the artistic and cultural community in Bangladesh, and they've been, like many other sectors of the society in Bangladesh, been deeply involved in the past few months in this great democratic upheaval, and have brought all their creativity and their passion into operation. So we saw the streets of Dhaka and Chittagong transform into these gigantic installations, which you could see pour forth the beauty of the people of Bangladesh and their passion for freedom. So that's my point of entry. That said, I also keenly follow, because I read Bangla, the Bangla blog sphere, especially independent media voices, social media accounts, which in these few months went on and off as and when the regime turned on or turned off the tap of expression and information. And as someone who comes from a neighboring country, who is also Bengali, I was deeply interested and engaged with the creative transformation that I saw happening before my eyes. I found it very inspiring in the fact that a random collection of young people, beginning with Dhaka University, spreading to all the other universities and campuses in the country, were able to stand up at a time when it seemed that the ruling regime's control over the country was near total. They had an absolute and more majority in the parliament, because they had, staged elections in which there was no opposition to speak of. So naturally, they got that majority. They had a near control over the means of communication, over the media. They had an absolute control over civil society through the combination of rewards, blackmail, and oppression. So that triangulation in which you didn't know whether you would be lauded by the regime one day and then heckled by its informal enforcers and then sent to prison on some false charges of the third day was a reality. And in the face of all this, for a generation of young people that many who are older would consider initially to be apolitical, that these are people who are not part of organized political formation, that they should stand up and create an upsurge that completely changed the landscape is, short of anything, it is inspiring. And I think that has had its effect in neighboring, for instance, in West Bengal. We know that in the past few weeks, there has been this real upsurge that has to do with women's safety and freedom and lack of violence and oppression. And we can see that the protests in Calcutta clearly are take the idiom from what is happening in Bangladesh. It has also happened in Pakistan. I was delighted to see student protesters in Pakistan singing songs in Bangla and saying "Ami ke, tumi ke, Bangladeshi," which is a remarkable transformation of our subcontinent's idioms of expression and expressions of belonging and identity. It's not new. I want to remind our viewers that, for instance, in 2014, there was a massive protest in Jadavpur University in Kolkata, which became known as the Hok Colorado protests, led by the words of a song sung by a Bangladeshi singer, Arnav. Everybody sang this song, it became completely identified with the protest. So this spilling over of one democratic upsurge into the context of another is not unfamiliar to us.
No, so thank you for that. And I really feel like for all the terrible things in the world, the young people continue to inspire us and continue to allow us to still believe that things can change. And just what you said seems like such a cautionary tale for countries where we are on the path of unbridled power, and it tells you how bad things can get. But also, I think it is a cautionary tale for those people in those positions of unbridled power that nothing lasts forever, and a tipping point can come. And when it comes, in spite of every single institution compromised, sometimes it's too late. It's too late to control that tide. So there's a lot of complexity there, but there's also a story of hope. I do want to address something that, of course, has been, sort of blown out of context in some situations, misinterpreted. And of course, we have the whole WhatsApp university of misinformation very much in play. Protection of minorities, protection of Hindus in Bangladesh. Now, I also do work with Hindus for Human Rights, which is an advocacy organization which started in the US. And I think they were the only sort of Hindu voice of resistance talking about this and saying, look, this is really terribly sort of violent and, and causing more trouble in what is happening in Bangladesh, in misinterpreting and putting all these false narratives out that there is so much of targeted attacks on Hindus. So let's just dissect that for a minute, if that's possible. I know there are overlaps between Hindus and Awami League supporters, and therefore it's not always possible to identify, what the reason of attack may have been. At the same time, of course, we don't minimize attack on any minority in any country, whether it's India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. And we do recognize that it is incumbent on the majority to sort of offer those protections and for the government to say that everybody is equal in front of the law, which I think the Bangladesh interim government has done very strongly and come out very strongly to say everybody's equal, right? And they have made the right sort of gestures in going to a Hindu temple and giving out these public assurances of, stopping violence and protections for minorities. So Dr. Farhana, I'd love your comment on that, and then we can have Shuddhabrata.
Sure. Thank you. So what happened is right as soon as Sheikh Hasina fled to India on August 5th, midday in Bangladesh, in that first hour, there were anti-Bangladesh tweets by the thousands on Twitter. It all felt very odd that why was this happening? Within the next few hours, we had massive number of social media posts that were being generated out of India. You can track those numbers, claiming that there was a Hindu genocide. It's very odd that a country that just toppled a dictator and is in a kind of euphoric mood, that there be a genocide overnight. What did happen was there were angry attacks or retributive or justified or sometimes just politically driven and opportunistic attacks against Awami League loyalists who had brutalized and ruled with an iron fist in whichever locality they lived in. So what you saw was that it was an attack against the Awami League and an attack against the police force, because the police had, heavily brutalized and killed so many students, right? 33,000 injured in 3 weeks is a lot of people, and several hundred dead in that time. And then more dying because, they went into critical injury and they're continuing to die every day right now. So amongst those Awami League loyalists and police force, naturally there's going to be some Hindus, even in a Muslim majoritarian state, right? So some of them were naturally Hindus, and some people took this opportunity to, let's say they had a property dispute, right? Or they had some other grievance. And obviously there are people who have, these kinds of sentiments of religious animosity. So everybody who wanted to be opportunistic, not everybody, some people did. So what we did see is that that night on August 5th, there was absolutely violence. Within minutes of that news breaking, the students galvanized into protecting all temples and mandirs and girjas and churches. They organized in protecting institutions, directing traffic. So you had a group of students who just barely survived 3 weeks of, brutality and being shot at. And then this euphoria breaks out, and then this violence breaks out by, let's say, the oppositional groups who had been deeply tortured for 15 years, other people, and certain opportunists. But what that led to was that this propaganda machinery only picked up on the narrative of how many Hindus were being attacked rather than put it in the context. So investigative reports pretty much in that first week showed that about 1,500 Awami League or 1,600 Awami League supporters were attacked, their homes were attacked. Out of the 1,600, somewhere between 50 to 200 were Hindu homes. So that proportionality makes sense if you think about the percentage of the population, overall population, in terms of demographics of the percentage of Hindus in Bangladesh. And or even though we shouldn't really talk about percentages, because people say percentage, but they don't look at how many millions that means in a population that's expanding every year, right? So with that, it increases, the total number has actually gone up. But if we're talking about number of households, so what I'm trying to say is the propaganda and misinformation actually ends up delegitimizing actual Hindu voices out of Bangladesh and their actual concerns. It riles up this hysteria, and it was coming largely out of the troll farms, first in India, and it spread like wildfire on WhatsApp, but it was also organized by the wider kind of supporters of the Hindu Rashtra regime in India that exists globally. So you saw that happening in North America, in Europe, in the UK, in Australia, and elsewhere. And there was this collusion happening between what was coming out of that kind of Hindutva narrative of the spurious claim of a Hindu genocide that was not happening in Bangladesh. And then you had Hindus in Bangladesh who were either very terrified because of they were getting more worried. There were some false flag operations by the Awami League because they wanted to create evidence to support that, because they wanted to destabilize the interim government or the student movement. They wanted India to reinstall Hasina back to Bangladesh and put them in power. So there are all these forces at work. So what ended up happening is people were either dealing with like trying to rebuild a country, get a government in place, deal with opportunistic looters or violence, but then suddenly we're fighting misinformation, stochastic warfare almost. It's information warfare. What's happened is that you mentioned, that the WhatsApp University. Well, it's worth noting that India ranks #1 in the spread of misinformation in the whole world. And this is according to the 2024 Global Risks Report of the World Economic Forum. So the wildfire that raged in India, that even the pundits, the liberals, intellectuals, the celebrities believed, it was so strange for us to watch, like, why is the Indian Parliament talking about something that never happened in Bangladesh? Why are people talking about things that don't exist? We've got bigger things to worry about. So we saw that even Hindus in Bangladesh were putting out statements immediately saying, they created the hashtag Hindus are safe in Bangladesh. They were giving statements. They're making posts on, writing out posts in Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. The leaders of some of the Hindu Mahajat was like, they were giving videos, like video interviews constantly. You had young Hindu influencers in Bangladesh making memes mocking global Hindutva in India, literally creating the hashtag save Bangladeshi Hindus from Indian Hindus, right? So, I mean, it's gone so crazy that their voice has been usurped for a very nefarious purpose to create a narrative of what has been invented, this invented term of Hinduphobia. It needs to show that Hindus are under siege abroad, outside of India, because then it justifies the attack of minorities in India and justifies making any critique of Hindutva or Modi's regime to be a form of racism when it is not. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to curtail any critique or criticism of the Modi regime by creating this fictitious narrative of Hinduphobia. For Hinduphobia to work, they need to create the fake narrative of Hindu genocide. So as soon as Hasina fled, so for 16 years under Hasina's rule, where was India's concern about Bangladesh Muslims? In the last week of flooding, when both Muslims and Hindus drowned and churches and mandirs and temples all went underwater, where is the concern for Bangladeshi Hindus now who are facing the flood catastrophe? We don't see that, right? But they need that false narrative of communal violence that only creates more fear in the Hindu community. And I'm not denying that there is a history of these tensions, but part of that history, the two things that I want to point out very quickly. One is it's almost a colonial legacy, right? This whole communal violence, that discourse, but it also needs to create the Muslims as the other, so Islamophobia has fed into this. So you have 200 million Muslims inside India who are saying, well, we're constantly being attacked and no one talks about that. Or ethnic minorities in the Northeastern Territories, or Dalit women, or even think about the Bandit Queen in India decades ago and what she said, right, about the rape and torture of Adivasis. So what we have is this sense of we need to create this, stoke the Islamophobic fuel to both cover and deflect from what's happening inside India, but then also to support these spurious claims, these hysterical false propaganda claims of a Hindu genocide. This is not to discount that there are atrocities against Hindus in Bangladesh and Muslims in India, but the point is that it is not a level of genocide, and there is no such thing as Hinduphobia. That is a narrative that is not substantiated. There's a 1.4 billion Hindus in the world, and you don't see systematic dehumanization of Hindus the way you do see of Muslims, like in Western media by colonial superpowers and so on, because they need it too. So part of the propaganda machinery included a form of Hasbara type of disinformation, which is a very Zionist strategy against Palestinians and anyone who speaks out against genocide. They form strange partnerships on social media. So you have, and then they've then extended that partnership to white supremacist groups in Europe and in the US. So it's an unholy alliance of far-right ideology, and they're often driven by a form of religious fundamentalism. White supremacy is often about Christianity, Zionism is about Judaism, and you have this global Hindutva, which is about this a very specific understanding of Hinduism and its application. The second point is there's a difference between state-sponsored terrorism or communal violence versus sporadic. In Bangladesh, we do not have state-sponsored violence against Hindus, but in India, you do have state-sponsored violence against Muslims, tracing it all the way back to what happened with the Babri Mosque, to the way Hindu homes are constantly being demolished with bulldozers and cranes. So you have, and the government not taking any responsibility to stop that, to speak out against it. Whereas as soon as the interim government was being formed, every single person, including the chief advisor, Nobel laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the first thing he said is, we will not tolerate any attack on our minorities in Bangladesh. That's the difference. When the state comes out and acknowledges a problem and says, we're going to investigate and prosecute every single perpetrator We don't see that same kind of discourse in India, right? So there's a difference between state-sponsored violence and opportunistic or party-based political violence versus actual communal violence. So I think the narrative is a form of projection that's happening out of India onto Bangladesh, and that is not the ground reality. So some of our Hindu student leaders have been incredibly vocal about this. They fought alongside all the students. It was a largely secular student movement. They died as well. So they're very upset that why are our narratives, why are we political pawns? Right? Why are Bangladeshi Hindus being used as political pawns in this wider geopolitical and ideological strategy that is in South Asia, but also transcends South Asia?
Thank
So
you
I'll
for
leave it
that.
at that.
There's a lot to unpack in there. And without a doubt, one of the things that you said is that the far right and right movement sort of coming together because ideologically there's so much alignment in the way that they think and also in the tactics that they use. I think it's important that we also hear voices from the ground of the student leaders in Bangladesh. And while I couldn't have them on the show live, I do have comments from two of these leaders. One is Taposhi Dey Prapti, who's the president of the Jahangirnagar University Debating Club. And I also have Meghmallar Basu, who's the president of the Student Union of Dhaka University. And both were heavily involved in the student uprising and share some of their thoughts.
To my utter shock, if I just recall the moment that what happened exactly when at the 5th August, Sheikh Hasina had finally resigned. We saw after being on the streets and celebrating, and after being on the streets, when I came back home and I just opened my social media, and I also got a few calls from my different friends and families because they know that I'm a Hindu. They kept asking me that if I'm okay or not, if my family is in my native village, if they're okay or not. So I got a bit concerned, and when I, when I opened my social medias, I saw that various videos had been circulating in Facebook, Twitter, that we are calling X now, Twitter, and first of all, Instagram as well. And the videos that had been circulating, they contained disturbing images, disturbing videos, and disturbing talkings like the Hindus are getting attacked, the Hindus are getting killed, and some of the media, some of the Indian media had even covered the news like there had been an ethnic cleansing of Hindus that you have already mentioned, and we have also seen different videos of many mandirs, many temples getting attacked. Many people are being attacked, and that's because for their religious beliefs. Just because they are Hindus, they are being attacked. And we also saw some of the videos that and some of news articles in social medias that contained news like the Hindus are leaving Bangladesh. They are going to the border and they are leaving Bangladesh. They're going to the India. They're going to India for their safety, and the Indian government are willing to give them safety, etc., etc. And all of these, I will admit that all of these had created a bit of terror, anxiety, restlessness, because we were not even sure that what was happening in that situation. So if you tell me to sum up that actually what was the Hindutva narrative, the narrative was like that we, the Hindus of Bangladesh, we are safe in the Sheikh Hasina regime only. The Sheikh Hasina regime can protect the Hindus. The Sheikh Hasina regime can give proper safety and security to the Hindus, which the other regime cannot. This was the proper Hindutva narrative that the so-called Indian media and Bangladeshi media, that government, Sheikh Hasina government, that they were trying to do that. And if you tell me that what was the reality, ground reality from my experience, when I learned all of this from social media, I tried to call as we live in Bangladesh, we have friends and people everywhere in almost every region. We tried to call them. We tried to know what was exactly in the situation there. So the situation, the true scenario was that, yes, if we say that the Hindus were not attacked, it would be wrong. The Hindu community were attacked, but this was not a communal attack at all. The way that the Indian media had been trying to describe this as a communal attack, that the Muslims, the Islamists had been attacking on Hindus, this was not this kind of situation at all. The attack was purely, political. And many, the people who were connected with Awami League, even that Awami League regime, they have, even the BNP regime as well, they have always tried to use the Hindu minorities, not always the Hindu minorities, I'd say. They have also used the indigenous minorities, the indigenous community, the Hindu community. They've always tried to use us as a weapon, as a pawn to, serve their political agenda. And here their political agenda was like that we are not safe if Sheikh Hasina resigns. We're not safe if Sheikh Hasina flees away the country. So the ground reality were that there were people who had been attacked, the houses of Hindu people that had been attacked, but it was from purely political perspective. And we have also the very video that has been circulated all over social media, X, Facebook, and Instagram as well, that the Bangladeshis were in the border in Thakurgaon, and they were leaving Bangladesh and they are going to seek shelter in India. When I first saw that video, I immediately contacted a friend who lives in Thakurgaon, and I asked him that is this the true scenario? And he said, and he said to me that this was not the whole scenario at all. The Hindus were terrified, absolutely terrified, because you have to understand that the Hindus were also being, they were also in terror, because they are also, the way the propagandas had been spreaded, they were also in terror as well, that, oh my God, what if I was attacked as well? So the Hindus were in terror. They felt that their safety has been harmed, and they were trying to draw the attention of their UNO, of their local security officers, of their local government officials who were in charge back then. So the whole video that has been circulated is contains pretty much misinformation. And another post I have seen in X that one of our cricketer in Hindu community, his name is Litan Das, his house has been set into fire, and a very prominent political person from India had been shared this very news in X, and this did not even happen in the very first place. And there are so many videos circulating in Facebook and X and Instagram, which were in which were happened in 2021, 2020, 2022, and back then even I found a video that was the situation had happened in 2018. So, all of that happened in the Sheikh Hasina regime, all of that happened in the autocratic regime. And they used those videos and they edited those videos in a way, and they spreaded the propagandas that these are happening in after 5th August, and these are happening in nowadays. So the ground reality that I have already described, that the attacks were purely political, not communal at all. And many of our Muslim friends, many of our friends from indigenous communities, our Christian friends, Buddhist friends, they have tried to protect us. They have tried to protect our temples. They have formed simple support groups. They have formed support groups in their local areas, from the universities, from schools, colleges, and they have tried to protect us as well. So the very narrative that the Muslims are attacking the Hindus, the attack is being communal, or there is a communal violence in Bangladesh, this is not true at all.
Number one, I'd like to sort of run down through the propagandas that surfaced from 5th August onwards, at least for the next 4 to 5 days. One of the videos I guess a lot of you have also seen is a video of a sculpture of Rabindranath Tagore being torn down and being battered and being destroyed. I think a lot of you have also seen that video, if I'm not mistaken. That statue of Rabindranath was not vandalized in 2024. That was vandalized in 2023. And let me add a little bit of context to that so you can understand how deeply problematic the propaganda is. In 2023, in February month, when the Boi Mela, the international book fair in Bangladesh takes place, some of our comrades from our organizations and other leftist organizations sort of banded together, and they made a sculpture of Rabindranath, and Rabindranath's face was staged in order to represent that words are being muzzled in Bangladesh. Because in the book fair, certain writers' books were not being, were shadow banned, and the publication that produced their book was sort of, apprehended in a lot of ways. So we decided that we must speak against that sort of, muzzling of freedom of speech, and therefore made that sculpture of Rabindranath. Interestingly enough, it was the government of Awami League under whose pressure the University Authority of Dhaka University went down and broke the statue and sort of hid it. We sort of made we made a banner after it. We said, Rabindranath gum hoye geche. Rabindranath has also been forcibly disappeared. So that video has started resurfacing on all through Indian media, and people are talking based on that information, that actually Rabindranath's sculpture has been broken down. I've seen people like Tathagato Rai and a lot of BJP goons coming up and explaining why they had to tear down Rabindranath's sculpture, as if Rabindranath's sculpture was teared down. But in actuality, it wasn't. A lot of the videos of Hindus being targeted and tortured were from the last 15 years, were from the Hasina regime. And the problem with this sort of propaganda is no matter how much and how eloquently and how precisely we debunk them, that doesn't work because of the dynamic that capital plays in this. Hindutva is simply not an ideology that is, 10 far-right goons sitting in a room and making shit up. It's a well-funded machinery. It's probably the most well-funded ideological machinery in the world right now, probably only comparable to the Zionist lobby. So when these sort of propagandas are made and how they're fueled and how strongly they're fueled, it becomes almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. And that has become the reality in Bangladesh for the last 10 days. It's very, it's very problematic and puzzling. A lot of my relatives and friends who are from the Hindu community call me almost every single day and say, why aren't you talking about this and that? And, this debunking process sort of eats out at your own energy. You don't get to do constructive things because all day long, you're sort of debunking propagandas and, separating facts from fiction. And that has been sort of the narrative. And Bangladeshi Hindus have been caught in the middle. They have been used, they have been traumatized, they have been ridiculed, and they have been sort of the political pawns of the RSS and Awami League machine all throughout the last 15, 16 years. If you see what Shojib Wazir Joy said in the Indian media, I think the game is very clear. You'll have to say that there is no entrance of Awami League back into the Bangladeshi polity anymore after the mass uprising. So therefore, the only way they can get back is to establish the narrative that Hindus aren't safe in Bangladesh if Awami League is not in power. And in order to promote that, they do everything they can. And the Indian media did for the 10 to 12 days, put in all their effort to sort of create this narrative of a Hindu genocide, which is obnoxious. Danger here is oftentimes when we say these things are propaganda and these things are not true, oftentimes what Hindus hear us implying is, oh, we think Hindus are having a great time in Bangladesh. Hindus are under no pressure. In Bangladesh, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Buddhists are all brothers and sisters. And it's sort of a Disneyland version of Bangladesh, which is also untrue. The moment we sort of, use these propagandas and talk about these propagandas in a way that says Hindus in Bangladesh are really protected and they are doing great, is the moment the distance between Hindus and Muslims keep growing. And that only fuels the Hindutva narrative, that only fuels the Islamist narrative, and that only makes sure that those of us who want a Bangladesh that is inclusive and that is diversified, be it on ethnic, religious, and other bases, lose our political ground. So I think there's a very thin rope to be managed here.
It was really insightful to listen to Prapti and to Meghmallar. And as they represent the Hindu community in Bangladesh, what they say is very pertinent. I also want to thank Saima Khatun of the Bangladeshi Women's Solidarity Network, who made these clips available to us. So thank you for that. Shuddhabrata, I'll get you to comment on that as well.
Thank you, Nandini. I agree with much of what Dr. Sultana has said. I would like to begin by saying that one of the things that really interested me was that on the afternoon that Sheikh Hasina left Bangladesh, there was this general lament amongst Indian commentators and in the media sphere as if India had lost a colony. Bangladesh is not an Indian colony. It has never been. It is not an Indian province. So this, as in Bangla we say, hahakar, that happened within the Indian commentariat about now what are we going to do? Bangladesh is out of our control. That was very amusing, and it quickly was then supplemented by this concern for what was presented as a putative genocide of Hindus, which, as you rightly pointed out, is obviously not a genocide. I do want to say that I think across South Asia, in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, there has been a persistent situation where vulnerable communities, especially belonging to minority communities, often face violence. And that violence often occurs at times of change and upheaval. That's not specific to Bangladesh. That has happened everywhere. And it's also true that many Bangladeshi Hindus, I mean, I've read studies that have been done by intellectuals who happen to be Bangladeshi Muslims talking about the daily rate of migration, which is why, for me, it's very courageous for large gatherings of Hindus in Dhaka, as happened on the 11th of August, saying, this is our country, this is where we will stay. But notwithstanding that, there has been migration. It's also incorrect to say, as has often been said in Indian media, is that there is this persistent fiction of the Awami League being somehow the secular umbrella under which everyone can stay happily. The level of violence against Hindu minorities during Awami League rule has been not insignificant. I mean, we only have to remember, for instance, riots that broke out in 2021 during Durga Puja, and they broke out in Noakhali, where a staged occurrence of a so-called desecration of a Quran was then used as a trigger to unleash attacks against Hindu communities across the country. This was done under the Awami League's regime. I also know that there is this thing called the VPA, which was earlier the EPA, the Enemy Properties Act, and now called the Vested Properties Act. I know there have been efforts to amend this law, but the fact is that in rural Bangladesh, Awami League henchmen, Awami League little supremos, often use the VPA to alienate the land of very poor Hindu landowners. And that has often been the case where Hindus who come to India, and I do know several people, because you're Bengali, you will always meet people in your extended family who say that the problem is that the Awami League henchman in our neighborhood or in our village was the one targeting Hindus. So it's completely a misnomer to say that there is such a thing as a secular Awami League and everybody else is, whatever else they are. It's also true to say that the Awami League flirted with Islamist politics whenever convenient and necessary. We all know that there is this organization in Bangladesh, which also is quite influential in West Bengal, the Hefazatul Islam, which has had a long history of proximity to Bangladesh political elites, including the Awami League. They even have a presence in the current interim administration. So it would be completely unfair, and the Awami League, when necessary, would use the Hefazat against the Jamaat. But that is not to say that the Hefazat was any less vicious in its attacks on vulnerable sections within Bangladeshi society. The last thing that I want to say is that, yes, there may have been some attacks on Hindu places of worship and on Hindu homes and on Hindu property. But Immediately, I saw on that night itself, on the night of the 5th of August, there were messages coming across with video and photographic documentation from amongst the students who were forming human chains and bases of protection for Hindu shrines, Hindu temples, not just in the big cities. I mean, the spectacular one was, of course, at the Dhaka Mandir, where university and madrasa students formed a cordon and decided that this temple where I have been is not going to be touched. But that included little temples and small shrines in the countryside, where small groups of 5 or 6 young people would stay on vigil through the night, ensuring that Hindu temples were not torched. Some may have been, that may have escaped that cordon, but many were saved. I want to know, what was the last time that we heard, and I'm quite aware of these situations, where when Muslim places of worship, schools, hospitals, neighborhoods are attacked with bulldozers, with arson, that we have had non-Muslim young people in India saying on camera, we are here to protect this mosque. There may be many expressions of concern. There was a movement called Not in My Name, which happened after these attacks on individual Muslims starting from 2014. And for a brief while, they were guaranteeing the right of Muslims to offer namaz on the streets, but that died down. And when there were actual attacks on mosques, when mosques are bulldozed, when homes are bulldozed, while people may say this is terrible, I don't actually see Hindu young people in India saying, oh, this is our responsibility. We have to save our Muslim fellow citizens. So it's a bit rich coming from the Hindu far right handlers in India to say that Hindus are under attack in Bangladesh. The final thing that I want to say is that if you look at this pattern of violence, you would think that the immediate expression of concern and of retaliation would be in West Bengal, where, of course, there are many ties with both Muslims and Hindus in Bangladesh, because there are Muslims and Hindus in West Bengal who have close relations with people across the border. Not much happened in West Bengal. Other matters were concerning people in West Bengal during this entire period. There were sporadic attacks on random Bengali-speaking Muslims, primarily working-class Bengali-speaking Muslims in Delhi, in Uttar Pradesh, in Haryana, miles away from Bengal. And they were all led by the Hindu edge of militant, fundamentalist terrorism. There are such organizations who went on a rampage attacking any Bengali-speaking Muslim they could find, regardless of whether they were Indians or Bangladeshis. In one event, they attacked a settlement entirely of Muslims from West Bengal, saying that these are Bangladeshis. So while I think that what the dark edge of the WhatsApp university that Dr. Sultana referred to has been a modus by which the extremist edge and the violent edge of Hindu extremism in India has used this as an occasion to run attacks on vulnerable Muslims. It's important for us to understand that this is an occasion where, instead of this kind of cycle of retaliatory violence, that we learn from the young people in Bangladesh who are putting their lives on the line in some occasions to protect Hindu places of worship. That is a message that should carry far across in India. I also know that some of the attacks began happening before Sheikh Hasina left the country. And there were already people saying that these are Awami League false flag operations, so as to create a climate where it would be possible to say, look at what is happening. The Islamists are taking power.
Thank you for that. I think you echo a lot of the concerns and the sort of, the helplessness that a lot of progressives, even outside India, feel when we look at the way that the WhatsApp machinery has kind of taken over the minds of people who should possibly know better, because we know what disinformation looks like. We know that the media is so compromised in most instances, and the fact that people don't use their discernment and also recognize that when our neighbor is going through a transition, the most natural, what we say in India, the most natural thing is you want to ask your neighbor, how can we help? What can
Yeah.
we do? How can we ease things for you? Instead, we're trying to cause more trouble in a country that is trying to sort of correct itself. And that, to me, that's the most unfortunate part. And I'm so glad that we are having this conversation, because we have to sometimes, out of love for, the things that we like about our countries and we love about our countries, we have to call out things that are not right. And as you rightly said, the most inspiring thing is that people have gone beyond conversations online and among themselves to actually being there on the streets in Bangladesh, protecting those Hindu temples. And I think that's a lesson that most of us, will remember for a very long time, that this is something that was.
I just want to add that one of the hardest things has been the amount of lies and fake footage of photos and videos that were spread. Debunking takes time. You have to trace it to the original. So there's an entire machinery coming out of India and global Hindutva in generating and disseminating absolute false, libelous claims of using people's own personal photos. So it's a woman who's doing something completely unrelated to anything, stealing her photo and labeling it as that she's a Muslim woman, but calling her a Hindu woman who's under attack.
Yes,
You
I saw
have,
that.
people who are protesting a different issue, but then they're being labeled as, oh my God, look at all these Hindus protesting. No, it was not. So it was absolute, just such bold-faced lies. So it actually makes India look very, very uncredible. It makes it look stupid almost to the global eye, because they're being debunked to the point where some of us were calling it out online early on. So I wrote one of the earlier op-ed pieces that came out in The Diplomat around August 13th. Then you suddenly had a larger number of publications coming out, right? Whether it's, Al Jazeera and BBC were helping to debunk some of it, as was Deutsche Welles. But then you have websites like Rumor Scanner and Alt News and Bangladesh Fact Watch. So people were working over time to show, like, this is the original, this is the context, and this is the lies that you've been fed. But the damage is already done. And what is absolutely very unfortunate, I think, is that how educated Indians just swallowed that hook, line, and sinker without using an ounce of common sense. They basically superimposed, an animosity and an Islamophobia onto Bangladesh. Because right now, like I said, as the Hindus are drowning and their temples are underwater, where is that concern? There is none. Zero. Absolutely zero. Right? So it only exists to fuel a certain narrative. So anyone can see that. And right now, we've got so many articles that have come out in the last week against this propaganda, and India's losing battle in alienating every single one of her neighbors in South Asia. There's not a single country that actually has good relationship with India. And you must wonder why, right? So it's not just Bangladesh. It's happening with several other countries. So one of the things is that we want to have good relationship with all of our neighbors. We don't have problems. So exactly to what you said, Nandini, about this is a time of transition. You should be and could be a great ally instead of absolutely hounding us and attacking us and trying to destabilize this new journey towards reestablishing democracy in the country, right? We have enough problems to deal with. We don't need the regional, hegemonic power to add and stoke further, fan the flames. Because what's happening as a result is you have all kinds of pundits who are writing absolutely garbage op-eds in Western media by several dozen, outnumbering anybody, because we're too busy focusing on flood relief, building our country, dealing with, the Army League, disruptive politics. But at the same time, we're having to fight with propagandists and pundits out of India who are writing absolute garbage. right? So I think it's just making them look really bad, but they're causing the damage. They're influencing Western media. Who are then having to now, retract what they published before, or put out more corrective, more updated information. But at the same time, it's influencing policymakers, and I think that isn't exactly their goal. It's about that kind of, information warfare, that if you convince enough people it's happening, no one will actually believe the truth. And I think at this point, the issue is it's an opportunity to build new relationship with Bangladesh instead of pretending like it's a colony they lost. Bangladesh was never India's colony. And to impose what happened during partition, a memory of the partition, onto a country that is trying very hard to remain secular, to impose something that happened 78 years ago onto now, is not only ridiculous, but it's also a distorted form of historical narration and recall memory. So I think, because when people say, well, so when my ancestors came from Bangladesh and X number were slaughtered, I can turn around and say my ancestors came from West Bengal, and the trains of dead bodies were arriving from there too, right? So it's a very selective storytelling, because that communal violence of 1947-48 happened in both direction, across the border of both West Pakistan and East Pakistan, right, in the 40s. And then what happened in 1971 when Bangladesh became independent. Again, you can't take what happened 53 years ago and superimpose it to now. It's a very different set of realities, and those narratives just do not hold water anymore. And I think at this time, it would do well for thinking Indians to actually wonder what is happening, how they themselves are being used as pawns in that kind of wider political ideological narrative, and see how this is doesn't help them ultimately, because they are sort of cornering themselves into certain ideology that's quite rigid, and it may seem like it's very great. They're very, very wealthy Indians in the US who are huge supporters of this ideology, and they think that this ideology has delivered wealth to India for a number of years, and they are absolutely have blinders on for the communal violence that exists inside India, and they don't care, but they're happy to point fingers at neighboring countries. So I think it's just not the state, but the state needs to take some responsibility, but so do educated Indians across different sectors. Because if the majoritarian voice does not correct itself, we can't keep fighting this disinformation machinery. It's just not worth our time. It's going to run out of steam because no one's believing it anymore, right? So it is a good opportunity to course correct. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you for that,
And
Shuddhabrata.
yeah,
Yes.
thank you for that, Dr. Sultana. I agree with, again, much of what you say. I would, however, make a caveat. I don't ever, when I say Bangladesh, I mean all the people in Bangladesh, and I recognize the fact that that's a diversity, and I recognize that diversity. And I think that we should be able to acknowledge the same when we say India. The primary victims of the disinformation campaign that is run by the regime that runs on Hindutva happen to be Indians. Yes, it's now a lot of Bangladeshis are coming face to face with what the reality of this disinformation is. But in India, we deal with this every day. We've been dealing with this every day for the last more than a decade now, right? And there are, of course, many powerful forces within India that bolster this narrative. And you're absolutely right. It is not just the state. There is a powerful expression of majoritarian, regional, imperial ambitions within India. And we need to recognize that. I am never not going to recognize that. But having said that, I think it's also important for us to look at the fact that the same machinery of smoke and mirrors also prevents many people in the world from seeing that from the very beginning of the student protests in Dhaka, there were parallel student protests in solidarity with these protesters in major Indian universities. I've seen them in Delhi University. I know of them in Calcutta. today, not today, I think tomorrow there is a call in Jadavpur University for students to protest against what is perceived as the sudden flow of water from Indian dams that have caused, that there is a perception that that has led to some of the misery of the floods in Bangladesh. So on an everyday level, there are many efforts and many initiatives by groups, large and small, to counter the narrative of disinformation that the regime and its supporters want to put out. And let's recognize the fact that we are seeing it weaken. This is a very important thing for us to underscore, that what is happening within Indian society at large, the churn that is taking place right now is at a significantly different place from where we were, let's say, in 2018 or 19. And the narratives of the regime are treated with, and of the media, are treated with a great deal of skepticism. And there are all sorts of groups actually telling the regime, be careful. I saw a farmers' leader from Western Uttar Pradesh, who has nothing to do with Bengal or anything Bengali, said, we have learned from the people of Bangladesh how to handle power, how to handle the forces of tyranny. And immediately he was attacked by people in the Indian media. How dare he say that, and so on and so forth. Fact is, he said it. There are people everywhere in the country who are beginning to say that if these things can happen in many other parts of the world, in our neighborhood, let's say in Balochistan, there's a tremendous upheaval happening in Balochistan. We're not unaware of that. In the protests that occurred in Calcutta against the horrible crime of the rape and murder of a doctor, the signs, just as the Bangladeshi protests included Palestinian flags, some of the protesters in Calcutta carried Bangladeshi flags, or they used the Kurdish slogan, Jin Jian Azadi. I think we're at a moment in time where the cross currents of what is happening in the pro-Palestine protests, in the struggles for freedom in the Middle East, in the activism of people allied with the suffering people in Gaza or the West Bank, and in Bangladesh and Pakistan and Balochistan and Kashmir are actually, and of course, many oppressed communities in India are beginning to listen to each other. There is a narrative of states. Just as when Sheikh Hasina came to India and everybody said, oh, Bangladesh has come to India, I always treated that with skepticism. The current president or the prime minister of Bangladesh is visiting India. I would always look at it that way. Our prime minister claimed to be a freedom fighter for Bangladesh. He put out this absurd narrative that he had gone to prison in 1970 or 71 because he was somehow involved in the Mukti Bahini's narrative. And that's a complete pack of lies. I wrote an article debunking that, and he was the laughing stock for people to come. So there are, I think, you're right, this is a very interesting occasion and an opportunity for us to build bridges. I have to say that the media in India is at great fault. We pronounce and they pronounce on Bangladesh at any given opportunity. We'll see retired brigadier generals, political analysts, ex-diplomats holding forth on Bangladesh whenever necessary. But not a single major Indian newspaper has a stationed correspondent in Dhaka. Nothing gets reported from Dhaka or Chattogram or Borishal or any other town in Bangladesh. There should be a lot of give and take. We should have, and there was never a restriction on Indian journalists operating in Bangladesh. So when the student movement began, a lot of people didn't even understand what it was about because they had no news, they had no information, because there were no journalists on the ground from India covering what was going on. Nobody was talking to anybody. The Indian diplomatic mission, whose job, like every diplomatic mission, should be to keep lines of communication open with all sections of society, and that used to be the Indian diplomatic mission's task once upon a time, became just the liaison office between the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Awami League. That's not how countries conduct diplomacy. So there are major faults on the side of those in India, and again, I use the term those in India who have the fantasy of being this sort of behemoth in the region and who behave exactly like a clumsy giant, not knowing where they're putting their feet. And a lot of people in civil society, amongst universities, in arts and culture, in other walks of life who are listening to a different conversation. And so I read recently Anu Muhammad in Bangladesh saying that we have friends in India, and that is not the Indian government. We have friendship with the people of India. I would say exactly the same.
Absolutely.
We are
And
not the government of India.
thank you so much for that. I think that was a really great roundup of the conversation and also of the opportunities that lie ahead. Thank you so much to both of you for your time. And hopefully we will continue to speak and continue to build bridges and have many more conversations. Thank you.